Dear guests, today I am very happy to welcome our guest Polman, CEO of Unilever, our Chairperson of Board of Trustees, Mrs. Güler Sabancı, dear students and colleagues. We are both very excited to see that public interest in sustainable development has increased over the past few decades, driven by the influential work such as the report Our Common Future, which was published by the Brundtland Commission in 1987. Although in this seminal report, sustainable development definition was mainly focused on environmental aspects of development, it has evolved significantly over time, and today it is widely accepted that sustainability also includes an economic and social dimension. Nowadays, most international organizations systematically include the private sector in their strategies. This approach was evident at the latest United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, where heads of state recognized that sustainable development can only be achieved with a broad alliance of people, governments, civil society, and the private sector, all working together to secure the future we want for present and future generations. In this respect, we all know that Unilever has become a leader in innovation for sustainability. Our university hosted one of the sustainability leaders of the world, Peter Senge, this year in May, and he gave the example of Unilever as one of the leading organizations to set long-term goals to become a responsible citizen of the world. At Sabancı University, we have a similar vision to become one of the leaders in innovation and entrepreneurship for environment, society, and commerce. We were selected the most entrepreneurial and creative university by our Ministry of Science, Industry, and Technology. We were one of the first Turkish universities to sign the UN Global Compact. We have, since 2003, had required courses on business ethics in our FT MBA and Executive MBA programs. We had a family member on the UN task force that developed the principles for responsible management education, and we have since been recognized as one of the 12 schools worldwide who are prime PRME champions. And as the home of the Corporate Governance Forum, we are the Secretariat for the Carbon Disclosure Project and the Independent Board Women Project here in Turkey. But we don't rest, and we set bigger goals. We have set up the Entrepreneurship Committee this year with the Management, Engineering, and Social Sciences faculties, and we are starting a pre-incubation center called Sukul on campus as we speak. Our goal is to co-create the future and the leaders of the future. Unilever is establishing partnerships with universities to make this vision a reality. And we are happy to host the leader of Unilever, Polman, today to learn about their journey of how they set these big goals and how they are accomplishing them. Paul began his career at Procter & Gamble in 1979, holding many senior executive positions, including Group President of Europe. He moved to Nestlé in 2005, where he was the Chief Financial Officer and Executive Vice President to the Americas. He earned a BA from the University of Groningen, Netherlands, in 1977, and an MA Economics and MBA Finance International Marketing from the University of Cincinnati in 1979. Paul Polman has been the Chief Executive Officer of Unilever since January 2009. Under his leadership, Unilever has set out an ambitious vision to double its size while reducing its overall environmental footprint and increasing its positive social impact. Paul is Vice Chairman and the next Chairman of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a member of the International Business Council of the World Economic Forum, and serves on the board of the UN Global Compact. He is on the board of the Consumer Goods Forum, and he is a director of the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce. Last year, he has invited to serve on the high-level panel looking at the post-2015 Millennium Development Goals, and previously acted as co-chairman of the B20 group of companies reporting to the G20 on food security. He is also a member of the European Resource Efficiency Platform Working Group, chaired by the Environment Commissioner Janez Potočnik. Since 2010, Paul has been a non-executive director of the Dow Chemical Company. In recognition of his contribution to responsible business, in 2012, Paul received the Atlantic Council Award for Distinguished Business Leadership and the C.K. Prahalad Award for Global Sustainability Leadership. Married with 3 children, Paul is chairman of Perkins School for the Blind International Advisory Board and serves as president of the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust. I now invite our distinguished guest to the podium.
Yeah, it works. It starts to work. Okay, thanks, Dean Fusong, and obviously, thanks for being here. We had a great discussion with Nihat before, and my friend Güler, Sabancı. Obviously, I wouldn't be standing here without her insisting over the last few years to come, and this is one woman you can't refuse, I tell you. We are together on the Global Compact Board and the World Economic Forum and some other things, and I have to congratulate her and all of you, obviously, with the wonderful campus and institution that you built for obviously the benefit to yourself, but also for the benefit of Turkey. And it's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here. I just came back from India, so the talk of sustainability is pretty important. If you go there, and we were just talking about China, Güler just came back from China, but the limits to growth will actually be the planetary boundaries more and more so, and people are starting to discover that. I think you'll have some of that in Turkey also already, but increasingly you'll see that. What I'll talk about is very briefly Unilever. Probably most of you know the company. Talk a little bit about what is happening in the world, some of the mega trends that we should all be thinking about, and I try to keep it in a way that it affects all of us, and then perhaps talk a little bit about leadership. I've been told to talk for about 40-45 minutes, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion on anything you want. Unfortunately, the fact that I have a wife and 3 children only got 1 sentence in my whole introduction, but that's the most important part, so we'll talk more about that. So here we go. Company started in about 1930 officially, when the Dutch and the Brits merged together. We were 2 companies actually. A long history in the UK, started in the mid-1800s, and then in the Netherlands as well. After the Great Depression of 1929, all these companies were sort of hanging in. A merger took place. Why these 2 companies? One was in bar soaps, products like Sunlight soap or Lifebuoy, and the other one was in margarines. 2 ideal products for the same raw material, which was palm oil. So in order to be stronger again, these companies merged, and we're actually one of the few companies that is half Dutch, half British. So it's It's one of the few left with 2 nationalities. The start of the company, I'll go back to Lord Lever in the UK, is very simple. If you go back to Victorian Britain, it's actually fairly surprising if you read about that period, but the issues of hygiene were quite prevalent, and actually they were much worse than what you find now in many of the developing markets, even today. But 1 out of 2 babies wouldn't make it past year 1, which sounds now amazing if you live in Britain, but that was the case then. So Lord Lever got the foresight to invent his Sunlight soap, which was an enormously popular product, and it kept growing and growing and growing. Now, unlike many of his contemporary industrialists at the time, the Carnegies, the Mellons, or the Rockefellers, or some of the other ones, names that you have undoubtedly heard, this guy was kind of weird. Besides that, he never slept in a house, he always slept outside, his whole life, by the way. He also always gave his money away before he had it, which is normally not a very wise decision. But this guy was such a visionary, and he built, for example, the houses for his workers before he built the factory. Then he built the factory, he built the ports before he had the businesses. So he was someone who was thinking a little bit about, as the thing he says, is his concept of shared prosperity. It's actually interesting that it took until Michael Porter's article, more or less, a few years ago, of shared value creation. He just built his whole business on the concept of shared prosperity. And he firmly believed that investing in the people that would work for him, he's actually the one who introduced in the UK the pensions, for example, the 6-day work week at that time and all the other things. It sounds also normal now, but at that time he was obviously considered to be a rebel by his contemporary industrialists, but built a very great business over the years, and that is what we're still benefiting from today. The company obviously has grown since then. We are about 51 billion euros. I'll do it in euros now. We are in most of the countries in the world. We have about 2 billion consumers a day. We're in 7 out of 10 households, and all the other facts you can read on the chart. So it's a truly global company. And one of the things we think about is how can we use our global reach and skill for impact? Especially when it gets to some of these areas that we will be talking about that actually go back to Lord Lever's time, how to make a better world for all, how to make a more inclusive world for all. And if you have a company of this scale and impact, you find out that you probably can do that more effectively and faster than now many of the government or institutional systems that we have created. The Turkish company is equally impressive. We have about 5,000 people here. There are about 75 of the Turkish people working abroad, which is a very good indicator for us of talent development, if you can bring people abroad. We have about 50 people actually coming from this wonderful university, so we're grateful to you as well. You're part of the internship programs or experiences that you have, and obviously the more we can build these institutions together, the better I think it is for all of us. So we have a long relationship, although you're only here since 1999. We already have a long and established relationship with the university as well. So Turkey, we have about 8 factories here. Our turnover in terms of billions is about a little bit north of 2 billion. So it's a very well-established company, obviously well-positioned to service a lot of the bigger region around here as well. Here are some of the brands. Obviously the most famous one is the Algida brand. I think you all have had your Algida, and if you haven't, be sure you have one after I'm done. Ben & Jerry's is the other one, but you see all the other products on there. I don't have to go into the details of that. Here you see the importance of Unilever in Turkey. Halal, for example, is our product Knorr, which is our food product. Halal is a very important thing globally. Fastest growing food, if you want to. And our research center for halal is here in Turkey. And that serves us very well. That's just one example. Many other activities are here. Our brand development for the region, which is our marketing. You see export that we do here for about 130 million. Lots of that going to the direction of the Middle East, despite the current challenges, obviously. And then we have the other functions represented. I won't want to bother you too much with that. But let me get into a little bit of the talk and talk some of the trends that I see and how you should be thinking about that as you prepare for your own future. I thought that's a little bit more useful. The US War Academy in Carlisle calls this the VUCA world, a term that they actually used a few years ago. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. If you think that change is accelerating, never has change been so slow as today. It will be significantly faster as we move forward. You're probably used to that more than any others, but the world struggles with that. Moore's law is nothing compared with the changes that you'll see in the years ahead. And that is because a lot of the forces that have been building up as we created humanity on Earth and as we developed our economies are actually coming together in the century 2010 to 2020, more or less, and causes an enormous pressure point. And I'll talk about that. The four things that we see here are four mega trends that are all coming together. The first one is called the world moves east and actually south, which is Latin America. That's where all the development is right now. For the first time in history, we reached this tipping point of 50% of the global GDP being in these emerging markets. I call them aspiring markets. Obviously, that's where most of the companies get all their growth from now. What people forget is that if you look at Europe and the US, in about 20 years' time, 80% of the world population will actually live in these countries. And yet we often talk about it as one denominator, D&E, developing and emerging markets. But it obviously isn't anymore. Many different stages of development, from Africa to Southeast Asia to North Asia or to Latin America. But the world is changing fast. Kishore Mahbubani, who teaches at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Management, just wrote a recent book a year or two ago called The New Asian Hemisphere. And with this changing shift of powers to the economy to the east and the south, you also see a shifting power balance. It used to be that we would do a lot of things in the world around the US model, for the good and for the bad, but it created institutions, rule of law, governance, the way business was being run, and many other things. And to some extent, they played a fairly effective role of global stewards of peace and other things. Unfortunately, with these shifting power balances, you see some things occurring that were not occurring before, all coming together now, more or less. The first one what you see is the US shrinking back to its own territory. The recent discussions on the budget were a good example of that. Nothing being solved, very short term, abdicating their previous global roles. To the good or to the worse, I leave that up to you, but it is definitely the case. And what you see is that China and India are not willing to step up to the plate yet. There is a vacuum that is emerging in global governance. At the same time, with this rapid shift of the economies to the east and to the south, institutions haven't been adjusted either. You see most of the institutions with which we rule the world, at best the G8 or the G20, are still very much based on the Western-only model and is not very inclusive yet. Or some of the other institutions like the World Bank or the IMF or other things are actually from the Bretton Woods period of time. So there is a global vacuum emerging, and I'll come back to that later, at the political level, of which it makes it very difficult to move things forward. No Doha rounds. No climate change agreements. Protracted solving of the solution of the euro crisis. The sad soap operas every night on television now of the neighbors next to you in Syria, when nobody really takes any action to move that forward. It's very difficult. The watered-down declarations in Rio+20 that came out when countries had to sit together. Not much happening at the global level. Institutions, etc., not adapted to the global interdependent world. Politicians having a hard time to rule in this interdependent world. Technology, the financial world, all these things far escapes the way that they have set up their own political systems. Basically still on the basis of defending their own borders by local electorates for local issues. And yet the main issues that we face are global ones. The second trend, to go very quickly, is what I call living differently. I don't want to talk about that too much, but on one side you have aging population, on the other side very young population, on the other side you have rapid urbanization. You have about 70% of the world population that will live in cities. I just came from Mumbai on Friday, just before they celebrated the Diwali festival of lights. But in Mumbai, about 1,000 families come in every day. That's 1 million people every day, just in a city like that. Every month and a half, about a city the size of London is created in this world, in urbanization. It's going tremendously fast. Obviously, that lifts a lot of people out of poverty, but it's also putting enormous pressure on these cities. I was fortunate to be with the mayor of Istanbul on the high-level panel, and his main challenge is how do you make these cities function when you get that much of an urbanization going on. Enormous challenge, the green cities. But changing lifestyle, people marrying later, different family relationships, you know enough about those. The third one I want to talk about is digital revolution. I call that actually the consumer in charge. Facebook now is the third nation in the world. After China, India, there's over 1 billion people on Facebook. And consumers increasingly, yourselves, your generation, is very astute in leveraging that. You look at the Arab Spring. We organize on Facebook, we communicate on Twitter, we show the world what we do on YouTube. In absence of governments taking responsibilities where they should sometimes, people are connecting themselves increasingly and demanding change, wherever it is. In India, the girl was raped on the bus. Unfortunately, she lost her life. And finally, people said it's enough. And by the way, it's the young and the women that usually go into the streets first. We see it on other places in the world, including here or in Brazil or in many of the other places. We saw it in Spain when the euro crisis was there, or in Greece. But this digitalization of society, obviously also an enormous force for good, if you use that positively. But consumers are in charge. Whilst we've seen an enormous concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer people, we've seen actually an enormous distribution of power in more and more people. And that causes an enormous friction in the way the world functions. And then the final trend is not surprising. That is what we call the environment under stress. I would call it the end of the era of abundance. According to many people, we are rapidly depleting the resources that we don't have. You were introducing kindly the Brundtland report, where the definition of sustainability was to protect also the future, not only for us, but also for our children. And we're stealing from them at a rapid rate. According to WWF, we're not living anymore. If you would live like Americans actually right now, we're living, according to WWF, already off 1.7 planets in terms of resource use. 3 of the 9 planetary boundaries are already past what people would call the minimal acceptable levels. Climate change, biodiversity, nitrogen. So that's a very serious thing. If we would all live like Americans, my wife is American, so I have the rights to criticize them. Since I've been married to her for 35 years, I can criticize them a little bit. But if we would all live like Americans, we need 4.5 planet Earths, 5 planet Earths. If we all live like Europeans, we need 3 planet Earths. I don't know what you learned in school, but we only have 1. So we need to start doing things differently. Planetary pressures are becoming enormously constraining for economic growth. And economic growth we need. Despite what people say, there are still 2 billion people coming into this world as the world moves to 9.5 billion people. And our starting point, frankly, is not that good. We have about 290 million, especially young people, unemployed. We need to create jobs, 40 million every year. And I'm not talking about the 1.5 billion that are marginally employed, that we might call employed, but they're marginally employed. So we need to grow for that. So this is the situation of the world. I don't want to go into, I will skip some of these charts very quickly because I've talked about that. So what is our challenge? I think the main challenge came in 2008. For a lot of people, was a point of reflection. When the crisis of 2008 came, obviously, which started in the US with the subprime crisis and pretty quickly became a broader financial crisis, then a political crisis spread to Europe. You've seen some of that in Turkey, although you've been spared for a lot of that. But this crisis actually made people realize something. It made people realize that although in the last 2 or 3 decades, an enormous amount of people have been lifted out of poverty. In fact, 500 million people had been lifted out of poverty. China being a big part of that. Enormous amount of people lifted out of poverty. It had also come at an enormous price. Obviously, when stock markets went up 10–15% a year and everybody was a little bit better off, not many questions were asked. But when the 2000 crisis happened, people started to think. I think what people realized very simply is that the growth had come at an enormous cost at government debt. I mean, look at the US debt or the European debt. An enormous cost at private debt. People overextended. The mortgage crisis. Many people negative equity now. But also at an enormous over-consumerism of materials that were being used. You have right now in the world the top 1.2 billion people using 75% of the world's materials. And the bottom 1 billion people only using 1%. That cannot be a system that's in equilibrium. We also found out that despite improving the wealth and well-being of many with this globalization, myself having benefited from that, without any doubt, but we also found out that we left too many people behind. Despite lifting so many out of poverty, we still live in a world where 1 billion people go to bed hungry, not knowing if they wake up the next day. Where every 6 seconds a child dies of hunger. Where 2.5 billion people don't have access to basic hygiene or clean water. And it's the women, more than the men actually, that suffer from this globally. Well, you know, like a cancer in your body, that any system that is not in equilibrium is not going to last. It ultimately will be rejected in any circumstance. And the same is starting to happen with Mother Earth, because all these forces are coming together for the first time in history now. And by the way, once more, before 2 billion more people are coming into this world. The GDP has tripled over the last 2.5 decades, and it's going to triple again over the coming 2.5 decades, when we're already at a starting point that is not very good. So what are we going to do about it? And that obviously is a major challenge. In the absence of politicians being able to move the thing forward, as I talked, we need to spread a little bit broader responsibility. And that brings you to business and civil society. Obviously, the issues that we face of climate change, of hunger, of employment, of water shortages, and some of the other ones are bigger than any individual alone can solve. We have to start doing things differently than we did before if we want to solve them. It was Einstein who said the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That doesn't work. We have to start doing things differently. We have to work together in different forms of partnerships if we want to attack these different problems. And the one thing that is very clear is that business simply cannot be a bystander anymore in the system that gives them life in the first place. If societies don't function, business will not function either. If business doesn't become responsible contributor to improving, the consumers, increasingly more digitally connected, will ultimately reject. It took 17 days to bring the regime in Egypt down. Very ingrained regime. There was always youth unemployment, there was always fluctuating food prices, and unfortunately there was always corruption. Why did it take 17 days? Because you were connected. If it takes 17 days in Egypt, in this case to bring the regime down, it can take a nanosecond to bring companies down. And frankly, it's happening as we talk. That's why I'm so surprised that not more people understand this and rally behind this. I did a quick study before coming here. There are about 60,000 companies on the stock exchange. They're private companies, they're little companies that are not on the stock exchange. But there are 60,000 companies on the stock exchange that make up the global market cap. Sounds small, but that's what it is. And in fact, Pareto's law applies here as well. The top 1,000 of these companies account for half the market cap. We're obviously one of those, which you would normally expect, the Pareto's law. In the last few years, the swings in these market caps have never been bigger than ever. In the last few years, the average life of a company has also gone down. It's only 18 years now. Swings in market caps are enormous because reactions to lack of trust or mistakes are now amplified in this global economy. When a factory collapses in Bangladesh and 1,000 people die, mainly women, and by the way, they were paid 11 cents an hour. You talk about slave labor, you're getting pretty close to that definition. The next lowest paid country is Vietnam at 26 cents per hour, just to put that in perspective. These people were forced into the factory. Do you think it's cool to walk around with a $1 t-shirt that comes from that factory? People don't anymore. Do you think it's cool when LIBOR rates or foreign exchange rates now were manipulated by some of these Western banks? People don't think that's cool anymore. Do you think it's cool to sell horse meat when you say to people it's beef, when you expect to buy something, especially on food and food security? People don't think that's cool anymore. The digitization of society has given an enormous transparency. And that transparency is affecting many companies. Companies are struggling with that. And as a result, if you are not participating in helping improve the state of the world, I think increasingly citizens, all of us, have the opportunities to reject, and hence these fluctuations in market cap. Now, interestingly, although trust is low in politicians, trust is low in business, there's no doubt about it. If you ask the same citizens, they also expect business actually to be a better place to find solutions. So on the one hand, the trust is low. On the other hand, people say, but we need business to find solutions to all these things. So I'm simply advocating that we need different business models if we want to not become dinosaurs, that we need business models that give us the right, the permission to be here for a long period of time. And there you have to just go back to human relationships. The only way that you can increase your acceptance, increase your circle of influence, if you want to, is simply by giving more than taking. It sounds so simple, but it's hard to do. Obviously, we are in the situation that we are in globally because we've taken more than we gave. That's why we have a shortage of resources, for example. So if you can make a business model where you give more than take, where you actually become a solution provider, you will be accepted for a long time to come. But because you're also providing solutions to these enormous challenges, you also have enormous opportunities to grow. That's the interesting thing. This is not a world that lacks opportunity. This is a world that has more opportunity than ever. So what we said in Unilever is, we need a new business model. Let me see if there's a chart on that. We simply wanted a business model that said, how can we move beyond CSR or philanthropy or shared value even, to a business model that goes one step higher, where you can look anybody in the eye and say, we make a positive contribution to society. We improve the state of the world. We leave it better than we found it. That would be incredibly powerful. If you would scale that up beyond any individual company, and everybody would do that, you would actually improve the state of the world for everybody and leave no one behind. The beauty is that in the next 15 years, with the work that we've done on the high-level panel for the Millennium Development Goals, for the first time in history of mankind, we have the opportunity in the next 15 years to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. Wouldn't we want to be part of that world? Wouldn't we want to give that opportunity to everybody? Isn't the minimum right for people to go to bed with food in their stomach? Isn't the minimum right for people to have access to water to participate? Get access to education? Rule of law? If we can create that, this world would be great. So how do we use the scale and size of a company like ours and others to do this? We set a very simple target, double our turnover to get people in the mind of growth and creating jobs. There's no issue with doing that. But at the same time, totally decoupling that from our environmental footprint and improving our social footprint. We set some very big targets on that. As we are in 7 out of 10 consumer homes in the world, 2 billion consumers a day, we said we want to reach an additional 1 billion consumers, improve their health and well-being. Sanitation programs, building toilet programs, hand washing programs, oral care programs, all these things. And we are doing that. We're well on our way. Since we started the program, we've reached about 250 million people. No government can do that anymore. The second thing is to make all of our agriculturally based materials sustainable. It sounds simple, but it's very hard work. The company historically has been always on the foreground. Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, Roundtable of Sustainable Palm Oil, Stewardship for Sustainable Marinery. All these things were started by a company like ours. But despite that, we only found about 10% of our material was being supplied sustainably. We've moved that now in 3 years' time to about 40%. We'll end up the end of this year at 40%, on our way to 100%. You're a big producer of tea, but you weren't doing that very sustainably around the Black Sea. Low income for the farmers, poor yields, dying bushes. Your tea industry was about to disappear. Now we are bringing back the sustainable tea, working with 30,000 farmers, soil management, water techniques, pesticide techniques, whatever you have, to create sustainable tea. It's hard work, but there's no alternative. We can't keep using the resources that we don't have. And then the last thing is what I mentioned is obviously the total halving of the environmental footprint, which gets you into things of reducing carbon, reducing water, reducing all the other things that you are well aware of. Now, it makes good sense. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to talk a little bit about leadership very quickly, but it makes very good sense. It makes sense from different perspectives. Why do you want a sustainable business model? I'm stuck with my thing here. The first one is obviously the consumer increasingly gets it. A consumer wants a good product, a consumer wants a good price, but increasingly also sees that it is about the future as well. Increasingly also sees that the world that she lives in is constrained. We were talking about the city in China. You couldn't even see the other side of the street the other day. GDP increasingly is more defined as GDP plus, quality of life, of which air quality obviously is a good thing, water quality is a good thing. Consumers increasingly want this, provided you give them the right products at the right price. If the soup of Knorr doesn't taste good, she doesn't buy it anyway. But provided you can make a good soup at the right price, she now wants to know if the farmer is treated well, if it is sustainably sourced, what the labor standards are across the supply chain. Increasingly. And don't get sidetracked by some of the statistics coming out of the Western world. It's even more so in the emerging markets. Obviously, customers want that. Great customers sitting here. But everybody is asking for this because the consumers are asking for this. Walmart's sustainability plans, Carrefour's sustainability plans are now among some of the more progressive ones in the industry. And you need the scale of these retailers to convert some of these markets. Fuels innovation. If you don't have any water, take the example of India. I was in one of the rural areas in Uttar Pradesh on Wednesday, and the lady said, today I have to decide if I do my clothes or wash my hair. I just don't have more water. So if you can produce a shampoo that doesn't need any water, she still gets the benefits, and she can do both. It's a simple thing, but it's on many of our products. Set the bar higher, your innovations will be bigger, you'll be growing faster. Obviously, it develops markets because if they don't have the materials like the water for the shampoo, you develop the waterless shampoo, you can grow these markets and give them access to that. And then last but not least, I don't have to tell you, it saves you money. A company like ours for climate change, we have about 300-400 million euros every year as a result of floodings or droughts. You've had some in Turkey not long ago. But it's in every part of the world nearly every month. It affects a Hurricane Sandy on one side of the US, the drought in the middle. It goes from one part of the world to the other now. We just had two storms hitting the coast of Mexico on both sides. By the way, hundreds of people lost their lives. It doesn't even get reported anymore. So thinking about your value chain, the material you use, how you use it, is an enormous opportunity as well to save money and offset some of these costs. Our Algida factory, the new one that we built here in Turkey is a good example of a total green factory, green energy, zero waste and all that. Now, how do you have to get that into your organization? Very simple. The first thing we talk about is our own value chain. If we don't do what we demand from others, we don't have a right at the table. We first need to walk the talk ourselves. That's very clear. So we put all of our factories at zero landfill. We were actually spending over 50 million euros a year to bring products to the landfill. Making factories at zero landfill, I can tell you, these factories are better run. They have a higher safety record. The product quality is better. It pays out if you just design that. We certify our officers for LEED, and I talked about the Rainforest Alliance and the Lipton tea. Lipton is one of our tea brands, on how we work with the farmers here in Turkey. Have a look at this little film, which is called The Frog.
Sen iyi birisin. Annene düşkünsün. Sever ve sevilirsin. İş çıkışında mutlaka spora gidersin. İnsanlara yardım edersin. Her zaman. Bir gün Karadeniz çayının bitmek üzere olduğunu öğrendin. Yeni fideler ekilmezse bir süre sonra çayın kalmayacağını anladın. Ya çay olmazsa mahalle esnafı ne yapar? Peki ya simitçiler? Ya ofis çalışanları son bardak çay için ne hallere düşerler? Bu bir kabus. Umutsuz, çaresiz, mutsuz hissettin. Bunu engellemenin bir yolu olmalı. Bir şeyler yapmalısın, hem de hemen.
İstifa ediyorum.
İstifa ettin. Çayı kurtarmak için plan yaptın. İtinayla bavulunu hazırladın. Sevdiklerinle vedalaşıp ilk uçakla Doğu Karadeniz'e uçtun. Yoldan geçen ilk minibüse bindin. Yol sormak pek iyi bir fikir değildi ama yine de denedin.
Beni çay tarlasına götür.
Biraz daha acil.
Dere, tepe, bayır, yokuş gittin.
Çayı kurtarmaya geldim.
Sabah erkenden işe koyuldun.
Merhaba. Ben geldim.
Onlar gibi olmaya çalıştın ama olamadın. Çay toplamayı denedin, beceremedin. Taşırım sandın, yanıldın. Çayın geleceği için anlattın, gösterdin, gaza geldin, gaza getiremedin. Sonunda milleti bayılttın. Kakak, uyan. Ama ben diyemeden yanlış anlaşıldın. Sopayı görünce kaçtın. Ama uzaklaşamadın. Sandın ki Karadeniz'in sürprizleri bitti. Ama yanıldın. Özür dilediler, yanlış anladık dediler. Şaştın kaldın. Horonsuz Karadeniz macerası olmaz. Yaşayarak öğrendin. İlk fırsatta hemen kaçtın. Eve doğru yola çıktın. Dönüş yolu daha uzundur, anladın.
Eve gitmek istiyorum.
Bu kadar maceradan sonra artık buradan emekli olurum dediğin işini, sensiz yaşayamam diyen sevgilini, bıraktığın hiçbir şeyi yerinde bulamadın. Aslında bunların hiçbirini yapmana gerek yok. Tek yapman gereken çayın geleceğini kurtarmak için Yeşil Kurbağa'yı takip etmek. Yağmur Ormanları Birliği'nin onayladığı Yeşil Kurbağa logolu her Lipton ürünüyle sen de Rize'deki çayın geleceğine sahip çıkabilir, destek olabilirsin.
Well, that's a long story. I hope you got it all. My Turkish wasn't that good, but just thinking about things differently. We are now, in Europe, it's 100% sustainable tea. In India, we are now working with the Tata company, one of our big competitors, and transforming that market to sustainable tea. And you help everybody, and you save the tea for future generations. Hard work, but I don't think there's any alternative. Here you see what you do as consumers. I don't go into each of these examples, but you make your detergents, Omo, one of our detergents, get your temperatures down, get the products more concentrated, you save in transport, you save in water, get the quality that you can wash in lower temperatures, you save the energy, and the story goes. Knorr Sustainable Farming, Algida, obviously, equally responsible is how do you deal with the problems of obesity? This is a funny world where 1 billion people go to bed hungry. In between, we waste about 30-40% of the food. And then we have 1.4 billion people creating the biggest epidemic now, which is diabetes 2. So how can you be responsible in this is a very important thing, obviously. But more importantly is how you leverage your brands. I think as marketeers, you have a unique opportunity to leverage your brands to become a force for good. And one of the issues that I wanted to briefly share with you is the hygiene and sanitation. I've set the company a very simple objective, is to get for each of our brands about 1 billion people as fan club. Now it sounds like a lot. When I first mentioned that, they were looking at me and probably thought, well, he comes from the Netherlands and has been to one of these brown cafes or something. But it's actually possible. If you make any of your brands with a firm social mission, go back to Lord Lever with the hand washing of sunlight to save babies' lives and make it past year 1, you can actually think about that for any of our brands. Why shouldn't any brand that is in this world make a positive contribution to society? If it would make a negative contribution to society, why would you buy it in the first place? Often I get questions from journalists, why do you do all of this and who's paying for it? And I say, why don't you ask the ones who don't do it? They're the ones that are stealing. It's a very simple thing, but it's hard to do. So we said Domestos, one of our toilet cleaning brands, is not just about toilet cleaning, it's about solving the issue of sanitation or open defecation. Over 2 billion people, with then the issues of what goes in the water, what they drink, how they live, their sicknesses, diseases. It's a major cost to society. So Domestos, one of its objectives is to build 400,000 toilets globally. That's a strange business target. But by doing that, it actually increases its market and is growing quite nicely. Knorr that you saw, we set a very simple mission to get rid of the 1 billion people that go to bed hungry and solve their food problems, but working with smallhold farmers in a sustainable way. So Knorr has a mission to create 500,000 more jobs for smallhold farmers. Dove, one of our brands, stands for women's self-esteem. Unfortunately, all the advertising that is being thrown at you only talks about, have you done your legs, your facelifts, your buttock, whatever it is. And most of the women you see on photos don't exist. They're computer doctored. As a result, only 4% of women feel good about who they are. And increasingly, girls don't want to participate in sports or other things. Dove is trying to change that with their women's self-esteem. It created Dove Sketches. I don't know if anybody has seen Dove Sketches. But the Dove Sketches campaign on YouTube has been seen by about 175 million people. So to get 1 billion people behind the brand as a force for good, I don't think it's that irrealistic. In fact, the 1/3 of the world is connected already now. In about 20 years' time, we will have 50 billion connected devices, mobile being the strongest one. So why not connect those as a force for good? Just like they're connected now to demand changes. So take Lifebuoy, for example, another of our soap brands. And by the way, all these brands are growing double-digit. We don't have a problem with that. Even today, 4 million children die every year of infectious diseases. Pneumonia, diarrhea, don't make it past the age of 5. Every day, the equivalent of 40 Boeing 747s full of children crashes onto this earth. But nobody reads the newspaper. People don't seem to mind that that happens. Just think about in real life, if one Boeing 747 full of children would crash, we'd solve the issue in a minute. The simple act of hand washing, 5 times a day, would cut infectious diseases by half. You can save 2 million children's lives, and you make a positive contribution to society. Have a look at this Lifebuoy film for a second.
மகிழச்செய்யணுங்க தெய்வம் தந்த செல்வமையா நான் பெற்ற செல்வமையா ஆரோக்கியமும் அறிவும் பெற்று வளர்ந்துட்டானையா மனம் மகிழ்ந்தோமையா நாமே மனம் மகிழ்ந்தோமையா இந்த மகிழ்ச்சியின் வேதனை எதுவும் மறந்திடும் ஐயா ஐயா நாளொரு மேனியும் பொழுதொரு வண்ணம் என் மகன் வளருகிறான் உள்ளங்களிலே இன்பம் பெருகிட மனதில் நிறைகின்றான் மனதில் நிறைகின்றான்
मेरा बच्चा 5 साल का हो गया।
इतना सब 5 साल में कौन सी बड़ी बात है?
बड़ी बात है मैडम, ये गुंडापा का पहला बच्चा है जो 5 साल की उम्र तक पहुंचा है।
क्या?
So get every of your brands to have a social mission, and there will be an infinite market out there. That's all I'm telling you. Get your own house in order, work the value chain, take responsibilities from sustainable sourcing to sustainable living, and make your brands work as a force for good, and consumers will accept that. Despite the economic crisis, the company is growing 35%. Outgrowing its industry by about 2 times. There's no issue with that. If you do the right thing, people don't mind buying from you. If you do it responsibly, you'll also have a long and healthy future. Now, it takes a different form of leadership. And by the way, the corporate reputation is absolutely no problem with that. Because when you start doing this, obviously, people like that. We are the preferred employer in most of the markets that we operate, in Turkey as well, in fast-moving consumer goods. So you get that spin-off effect. The right people want to work for you, you create the right energy, and off you go again. Now, it takes a different form of leadership. It takes also a different form of running your company. We are, unfortunately, to some extent, publicly traded companies. But the first thing we did was abolish guidance, stop quarterly reporting, because we wanted to give a clear sign to our people that these are long-term things that you need to solve. So you need long-term behavior. Changed our compensation system and many other things. But it also requires different leadership skills. This is a very complex world where issues of water, food, energy are all related. You need people that first of all are interested in this world, obviously, but have a certain degree of system thinking and can distill that complexity into simple action. I'm glad you're teaching that and you're having that in many of your courses here, but many universities are lacking that. It needs people who feel comfortable to work in partnership. You cannot do it alone anymore. And in order to get that partnership, you need trust. And in order to have that trust, you need transparency. So you need people that feel comfortable with transparency. Then the road to improvement will not be an easy one. The lowest form of responsibility is called cynics. And there are many who will criticize. It won't work. Why should you do it? You're just exposing yourself. Why produce more numbers out there? The others won't do it anyway. You make a fool of yourself. If you're not driven by a deeper sense of purpose, you'll never get there. If you don't think that life is about improving what you found and leaving it in a little bit better state, you won't do it. If you're not focused on the interest of the common good before you're focused on the interest of yourself, you won't do it. If you think it's more important to be a very quick millionaire or to have a big title, you won't do it. You have to figure out what's important to you. You belong to a very small group in Turkey and anywhere in the world. In fact, less than 1% of the world population that is educated the way you are, that can do what you want to do. Make use of that and put it to good use. Fight for the people who don't have that chance. Can't go to university, born in places where they can't choose what jobs they have. The loudest voices in this world are the voices of the unheard. The billion people that go to bed hungry are too hungry to speak. They depend on us, they depend on you to do something about that. If we combine that enormous energy with an enormous purpose, we can change the world. It's the young people that are going to do this, without any doubt. To some extent, you could say the others have messed it up in the first place, perhaps unknowingly. But it's the young people and it's women. And I'll end on that note, because why it's women? You look at the skills you need as future leaders, of a deeper sense of purpose, longer term, partnership, you actually find that those are skill sets more attributed to the female race than to the male race. In fact, if you listen to Muhtar Kent from Coke, or you look at us, or you look at Mohammed Yunus of Grameen Bank, most of the investments will go in women. In India, we now have nearly about 100,000 Shakti ladies delivering our products to the small villages. And the reason you invest in women is because when you invest in women, they actually take the money home, they buy better food, they invest it in their families. When you invest in men, they first stop at that little shop on the corner to celebrate and get some liquid in, and whatever is left might go home. So it's a very important thing that these skill sets that we have, that we work diversity of the female population, not just in our offices, but actually throughout our whole value chain in everything we do. Because I think that will be a major force, just like the young are a major force, the women will be a major force. So those are the new leadership skills we need. I've talked a little bit about Unilever. I didn't want to talk too much about that. Some of the major challenges that we have in the world, why it needs a new business model, and how you can integrate it in all you do, and why that requires, very briefly, a new form of leadership. And it can only come from individuals like yourselves here. Do you want to be part of that? We'll have a bright future. The world has been changed by young people many times. Alexander the Great was only 22 when he became king of Macedonia. So was Jeanne d'Arc. She was only 19 when she did the siege of Orleans. Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, when they started the digital revolution. This world has changed more than people realize by the young, and it's time that you do it again. So thanks for your time and attention. Appreciate it. I don't know what you want to do next. I should have stopped by saying Teshek Kur Edrem.
I would like to thank you for your wonderful speech, and I was so excited to hear that we have too much to do and we have too much responsibility in order to change the world and to leave a sustainable world to our children. So we have a few time for a few questions. If you have, okay, let's begin.
Hello. Yeah. This question is for Mr. Polman. Did you have to make any major compromises or trade-offs to get to where you are today?
Well, our plan of totally decoupling, I've always said that it is easier in the first parts of the journey because you have the low-hanging fruits. And you need to focus on those things that you can make an immediate impact on. So the journey, I think, has been relatively easy. But what we find is if we want to really make the whole model sustainable, we cannot do that alone. And in these partnerships are often the challenges. I give you an example. The world is facing an enormous amount of illegal deforestation. Every year the size of France disappears. So that's 17% of global warming comes from illegal deforestation. That's, by the way, the same size as the whole transport sector in the world, the emissions of the transport sector. So we want to source all of our products from sustainable sourcing, but we cannot do that alone. A lot of the illegal deforestation is driven by food, the demand for pulp, palm oil, beef, soy, and all that stuff. So we have to take responsibility for that. We are creating coalitions with governments, with industry, and others to transform that industry and to be sure that forests that are alive are as much valued as anything else. So that will take time. And these coalitions are the most challenging ones, especially when you now see that governments don't take the initiative. In the past, there would have been governments have frameworks and all these things. So what we now find is you get a group of industry leaders to do this and governments to join. So it's a little bit of a reversal of the roles, but at the end of the day, what we're interested in is to get the results. So there are some challenges. The other challenge is that with consumers itself, how do you get a consumer to take shorter shower? You know, a lot of the carbon use in the home is in showering, with the heating of the water and all that stuff. So we're working on things, we're inventing things, we're giving things with them, you know, like little aerators in the shower, or providing products that say use less water. But it's difficult. To get consumers to change their habits always takes a few more years. So these are the things that we focus on, and we focus on that with broader coalitions more than anything else.
So, yeah. Here.
First of all, thank you for coming here and giving us this inspiring, let's say, lecture. I'm here with my friends from the management of Tea Talks with CEOs Club. Since 6 years, we've been to 10 countries, including Turkey, it's 11, and we had meetings with more than 170 CEOs. And there's this one question we always ask them. And I'm asking it to you right now. What is the reason that you, as Paul Polman, is the CEO of Unilever, and why not another person? So why, which choices in your life, which opportunities, which characteristic traits took you here in this position?
Well, my wife would give you a different answer than me, so this is very painful here. First of all, if you want to be a CEO, you shouldn't be one. People that are obsessed with becoming something, because of the title or the influence, etc., will often find out that the ladder is against the wrong wall by the time they climb it. And they behave in a way with a simple objective of getting that will not create much support from the people around you that you need to move up, if you know what I mean. So I don't think anybody says, I want to be a CEO, if you're in our positions. So the opportunity is sometimes given by pure luck, with an enormous amount of factors that play a role. I had a great job in Nestle. The CEO of Unilever wanted to retire. They had never taken a CEO from the outside. I'm partly Dutch, the company is partly Dutch, so I thought this exciting. So for some reason they reached out, and I ended up getting the job. There undoubtedly would have been better people, but they might not have been available at that point in time. But I don't think that's important. I have 3 children, 3 sons. And what advice do you give them, or what do you do? How do you want to lead your life? And I think it really boils down to 3 things that you need to be driven with. And I'll use them as the 3 P's, if I may. The first one is you have to be driven by a sense of purpose. You know, making money is not a purpose. So what is your purpose? You have to figure that one out. I wanted to be a priest. I discovered that there were the other 50% that I had neglected, so it wasn't worth it for me to pay such a high price. So then I wanted to be a doctor, but life took me in a different direction, and I ended up here. And I ended up in consumer goods. I'm fortunate, because I really care about trying to improve other people's lives. And so I'm passionate about that, amongst some other things. So you have to have your purpose, and then once you have your purpose, you have to have your passion. Because that comes often from a stronger purpose. The stronger the purpose is. So do what you like and like what you do. If you like music, become a great violinist. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. And we need more musicians, by the way, in this world. They make you smile. So follow your passion. And then the third thing is, I'd say, a positive attitude. Because the road to wherever you want to go is not easy. And you'll get bumps. You'll get bumps in your private life, in your business life, or in whatever challenges you will have. So you need to have a positive attitude. My father, who unfortunately passed on a long time ago, always told us the story of the coffee bean, the egg, and the carrot. The egg was very soft. You put it in boiling water, it becomes very hard and stubborn. Can't do anything else with it anymore. The carrot actually was strong, but you put it in the boiling water, and it becomes soft and mushy. Can't do anything with it anymore. You put the coffee bean in the water, it changes the color of the water around it. and it stays the coffee bean. So become the person who changes the color of the water around you. Become the coffee bean, and you'll be successful. Purpose, passion, positive attitude. And then there's one small skill for leadership that I think is important besides all the other things you read in the books of, 10 tips to be a highly effective leader and how to play piano in 2 minutes and all that stuff. You just simply be a human being. Just simply be a human being. Be who you are. There are so many that cannot be who they are. I'm working with a thing in the UK now with Vincent Nichols. He's the Roman Catholic Archbishop. And he called me. I don't know why he called me. I'd never spoken to the man. I didn't know him. But since he was the Roman Catholic Archbishop, I thought I better pick up the phone because I never know what happens after I leave here. And I need to cover my options. So I was a little, And he said, we have a big problem because people are very conflicted. Divorce rates going up, suicides going up, happiness going down actually in most countries. And the reason for that is that they are home and they kiss their wife goodbye or their husband and their children, they hug them. And I love you, little Johnny. And then they go to, and they have a certain amount of values, just like our parents had to give us a better life. And then they go to work and they have to behave differently. Then they work for institutions on how can I abuse people, or how can I pollute the world, or how can I enrich myself. So this pressure is enormous in society. And so we're looking for things of how we can help and create more of a code of ethical capitalism. There's actually nothing wrong with capitalism, to be honest. I might sound like a socialist or a communist, but there's nothing wrong with capitalism. It just needs to evolve. Franklin Roosevelt did that in the US when they had the Depression, and it's time we do this again. More of a common good. This was an original idea from Adam Smith. What's interesting, Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. It's interesting, he was a moral philosopher. He thought that because we like to belong to, we are herd animals, human beings are herd animals, that the social pressure or the need to conformity to be in the herd would lead us to behavior that would be in the interest of everybody, the common good, not the individual. So what we need to do now is evolve this capitalism, I think, to a new form of capitalism, a little bit more socially responsible capitalism, whatever you want to call it. And these values that come into that is a very important part of that. That's the only reason I agreed to be part of the high-level panel of the Millennium Development Goals, because it was a lot of work. But that is the only opportunity we have right now, at least I saw, to build a global moral framework that everybody could refer to. And starting with irreversibly alleviating poverty for everybody. Who could disagree with that? In a more equitable and sustainable way. Who could disagree with that? In fact, the only growth industry now in Europe is books about capitalism. Capitalism at risk, capitalism in crisis, new phase of capitalism. It's the only growth industry in Europe. So I was flying back with my wife from India on day before yesterday, and I said to her, I'm going to write a book also now. And which you shouldn't do if you're a CEO. Any CEO who writes a book is usually gone the year after because it's about how great I am type thing. So I've always stayed away from that. But now I'm thinking about writing it, and I already found my title. I call it 50 Shades of Capitalism. So if you can provide me with some of the shades, then I can fill my book. We'll take one more.
Due to our tight schedule, I think we can have one more question.
We can take 2 or 3 quickly, and I'll try to give one
perhaps.
answer.
Okay, here we have
Go ahead.
one.
Do you believe that you really improved many people's lives since you were in charge?
Sorry?
Do you believe that you really improved lots of people's health since the day you were in charge in Unilever?
Well, fortunately, the company has a long history and a lot of values, so these companies cannot, if the average life of a company is 18 years, and the company is alive already for over 150 years, it must have done something right. to be accepted. And part of that in our mission, we happen to be in hygiene and nutrition, is making lives better for a lot of people. Many of these economies could not function otherwise. When I talked to Prime Minister Singh in India, the only thing he said was, I grew up in this little village in India, and we had Lifebuoy, and I'm probably sitting here because of that. Now, I don't know if that is true or not, but we certainly see the influence. We measure that. We actually take villages that we have a whole village covered with hand-washing habits versus a village that hasn't. You can see the difference. Kids being sick or dying. And then, so a lot of these things these products were invented for a good cause. So yeah, that's what we do for a living. And that's what we should do for a living. There's absolutely no question in my mind. And if you can make that your model as a company, like fortunately many companies do, that's incredibly motivating because it gives life a purpose. If you can do that by also making a living and taking care of your family and other things, it's even better. In India, I have the statistics because I just came from India, so I apologize for that, but we can take them from any country. But in India, we have 17,000 people working for us, but there's a multiplier of 60 in the supply chain. So the whole value chain has 1 million people, more or less, if you multiply it out, working for you. So these companies build these economies, often where governments still fail, to be honest. I visited one of these Shakti ladies, and she was able to send her 2 kids to education. She's now taking education herself, just by substituting her income, by distributing products like ours. You improve people's lives. And we are a very simple industry. I went to the University of Cincinnati. I would have never been accepted at Sabancı University because I probably would have flunked the exam. I'm not ashamed about that because we are a very simple industry. We put some materials in a package, some products, and it's 100% transparent, and we sell it. We are really what you call the real economy. This is what made this world function. Interestingly, if you look at what happened since the 80s, there's an article in The Economist, actually, that I read this weekend. But since the 80s, the part of the economy that was manufacturing versus capital was always more or less constant at 60-40. And then capital took over. We've created, with the IT revolution, no jobs. And we have, all the wealth has gone into the capital markets. Fewer people earning more people earning less, is basically what the global story has been over the last 2 or 3 decades. If you are in an industry like ours that creates jobs with real products, real smallholder farmers, real feeding of people, that's very useful for society. And I think we're starting to realize that again. I did a little study when I was in my previous job as CFO, and before the crisis in 2008, 70% of the US combined profits in the US came from the financial sector. In the past, that was 30-40%. When that happens, people should see red flags going, because what economy is created, what value is added, those are supposed to be service industries with servicing the real economy. That's how they've been invented, not the other way around. So that's why we have to turn a little bit this capitalism, fine-tune it, make people realize again how the world will function. And I'm worried about it because we've put a lot of money with quantitative easing in these economies. The US even now, they're pumping in 80 billion a month in quantitative easing. In fact, Bernanke tried to get off the drug and it didn't work. All of a sudden, you saw the panic and they had to keep doing it again. They're like on steroids. And all that money is pumped into economies without growing economies, because it ends up not in the right sectors, which is the real manufacturing sector. It ends up, unfortunately, in non-productive sectors, as I call it, to a great extent. So we have to really correct that before it becomes an even bigger crisis and fine-tune the way we run the world. It's a very challenging thing at the time that everybody looks at their own territories and isn't working across boundaries. But we have to play part of that. We'll take a very quick question here, because otherwise... Go ahead. Ladies first. Good.
Yeah. Could you take the microphone?
Sorry, and I'm doing my DBA in sustainability,
Right.
and I recently became a golden researcher, supported by United Nations Global Compact. My focus is on employee well-being, actually
Right.
creating shared value through employee well-being. And I know that Lamplighter program
Right.
is an award-winning program.
Right.
I'm curious, how do you measure the effectiveness of
Okay.
your well-being program, and
Yeah.
how can we collaborate together as researchers, as golden researchers?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Obviously, social compliance is becoming increasingly important throughout the whole value chain. Güler has always been very much fighting for women, but also we are both on the Global Compact. The Ruggie framework is a big part of that. So very much on the same line. What we did with Lamplighter, Lamplighter is nothing else than giving all of our facilities, sports facilities, giving people access to healthy eating advice, giving people medical access, creating a little bit of a team spirit around that to create a healthier work environment. And we can show with the hard numbers, with absenteeism, with engagement scores and all that, which made it very interesting. So the WHO is using that now. And the reason it gets recognized is because it links really with output. We're now at the stage, obviously, that our medical insurance is going down. So it's a self-paying program again. It's a good thing that, to what we were talking here before, if you take a long-term perspective and do the right thing, it actually pays out. It doesn't have to be more money. If you get out of the quarterly rat race, if you can look beyond the quarters, it makes a lot of sense. So Lamplighter, as we call it, is a very successful program for us, and we make it available to everybody. Unfortunately, the WHO, who only lately started working on non-contagious diseases because they were only focused on infectious diseases, whilst actually more people die now of heart attacks and other non-communal diseases, doesn't even have a gym yet in their building. So I say to Margaret Thang, stop preaching companies like ours, start acting also. It's very important. So we've made the Lamplighter program available to them and all that. So what we can do with academic circles as well is, again, is share these learnings, because academics doesn't mean anything if there's no empirical evidence. And so you need to always hook up with all of us together. And when I talk here about civil society working with government and business, I also mean the academic society, obviously, in there. So it's there that we need to find ways to work together. But, yeah.
With you, perhaps, to see how we can collaborate as golden researchers,
it's no problem.
and find a solution in new business models.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
this is our
Absolutely.
area of focus.
No, it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So quarterly rat race is the obstacle in business, and election cycles is the counterpart in government. Government is part of the problem, part of the solution. Any thoughts, any work you're doing on that?
You know, I just saw a study that Forbes did. 75% of American CFOs would postpone the right positive NPV decision in the quarter if it would affect the guidance, difference in guidance, which is ridiculous. You know, Jacques Wells was 40 months CEO. He had 40 quarters. He hit every quarter. He only missed 2 by 1 penny. I mean, the guy should have been in Las Vegas. The whole business was managed on expectation. It was ridiculous. No wonder that when he retired, he said shareholder value was the dumbest thing I ever did. But why did it take him till after retirement? You know, many CEOs make big statements after retirement. All of a sudden they feel that they got paid too much. Why didn't they say that when they were, So when I abolished the quarterly reporting, I did that the day I was appointed, 5 years ago, January 2009. I was appointed CEO, I abolished guidance the same day. Share price went down 8%. People said, why did you abolish guidance? Well, I said, because we want to go long term. Nobody says you have to do this. Nobody says you have to do quarterly reporting, by the way. So I only figured that the day they hire me, they can't fire me. So that's why I thought it was better to do it the first day than to make it your own problem. But the market thought he has something to hide. There must be bad news coming. So you get an enormous pressure of people to do that. But that probably for us has been one of the best salvations. Now we're working with a lot of things, with the governments to try to change regulations, with the financial industry. So there are many efforts going on to bring in more long-termism in our thinking, to reward patient capital more and other things. So I'm perfectly happy with different tax structures on dividends for people that have the shares longer than shorter. The average holding period of shares now in England in the FTSE is 8 months. It's ridiculous. It's less than an annual report I publish. Now, obviously, day trading does a lot, but it's ridiculous. So these are not the shareholders that care about your company. They care about their financial return. Now, interestingly, most of the financial returns are for pension funds, for people like all of us that are worried about their long-term guaranteed security. So we need to change the systems of reward at the financial side. We need to help CEOs feel comfortable about communicating about long-termism, seeking the right shareholders versus responding to the existing shareholders. And then we need to work with governments to change some of the frameworks. So it's again this tripartisan leadership that is absolutely key. But it's one of the biggest diseases in this society, that we've become a society of managing expectations. It's interesting with Unilever. I can handle anything because I frankly don't care. But we do results. So we have results, let's say 6%. The industry is at 3%. We grow 6%. But the analyst had us at 7%. What do you think the headlines in the paper are? The headlines in the paper are not that, oh, they grow so well because they have a sustainable, responsible plan. No, the headline is they misestimate. Unilever in trouble. Slowing down. A quarter of below expectations. It makes you feel, because my mother is still alive, she's 85, and she calls me with every Dutch article and the heading, and she feels always so sorry for her son. But I have to explain to her, that's just expectation society. There's nothing anymore real. It's foo-foo dust. But that's the paper nowadays. So if we don't change that, because that drives behavior, it's very important. So it was Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits. Did you read 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders of Stephen Covey? So in this book he said, something always stuck to me. He said, you cannot talk yourself out of things you've behaved yourself into. So you cannot talk yourself out of things you've behaved yourself into. We've behaved ourselves into an awful pickle there. We cannot talk ourselves out of it. We have to behave ourselves out of it. You understand? So that's why we want more CEOs to do these things. What we lack right now is courageous leadership. We need more Güllers and Sabancis and Merkels and others. We lack courageous leaders, to be honest, who have the courage to do this. Because the forces will be against you. So we have to help them and nurture them and create them. It's absolutely key. That's the scarcest commodity in the world right now. That's why you are here. You become great leaders. You are great leaders already. Otherwise, you wouldn't have picked the university. So how do you leverage together and individually? What we do as an industry is I've created the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, because we're a little bit more in Holland, where we asked the former Prime Minister with the leading multinationals, Axo, Philips, Shell, DSM, Heineken. So we're very blessed with a few good multinationals where the leaders take a certain position responsibly, like on quarterly reporting and other things, so that a lot of the smaller companies under there can be sucked up. So you have to create space and give permission too. So we're looking at many of these initiatives that we try to do whilst at the same time running our businesses to change the environment. But it's not going to be a quick thing. That's not going to be a quick thing. But anyway, that's it. Thanks for your time.
So I would like to invite our President, Ms. Güler Sabancı, to make a closing speech.
It's not a speech, but it's just to thank Paul Polman, a great friend, but also I'm so grateful, and we are so thankful, Paul, for what you are. You said to be yourself, and Paul Polman is himself, and I thank you for that. You are an inspiring leader, but not only that, I add something to you, is that you are so generous. You are so sharing. You are so giving, and that makes a great leader. And let's give another hand to Paul Polman for thank you. Thank you, thank you. This is a custom in Sabancı University. This is a simple brick, but you today, Paul, giving us generously your time and your thoughts, sharing with us. You just put another brick to building for Sabancı University. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great idea, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You made it. Maybe you need to be in the pictures. Woman in the picture. Okay. We don't like the woman. Thank you. Hepinize